On clear days, you can see it from distant Tokyo, Mount Fuji. At a height of 3,076 meters, that's 12,389 feet, Mount Fuji is Japan's largest and tallest mountain by far, rising dramatically out of the wilds of Shizuoka and Yamanashi prefectures. A focus of mountain worship for eons, it's one of the great symbols of Japan. A striking mountain when viewed from afar, the hiking paths on the mountain itself are craggy and bare of vegetation, and often shrouded in mist. During the summer climbing seasons, when 200 to 300,000 people ascend the mountain's flanks, hiking conditions can be so crowded that climbers will be in stop-and-go traffic. They surmount the switchbacks to the summit single file, clambering over loose volcanic rock all the way. Now, the terrain of the mountain is volcanic because, of course, Mount Fuji is a volcano, and one, it so happens, that's had numerous violent eruptions throughout its history. Fuji is famed for its conical appearance, a near-perfect cone shape so iconic that it's easily recognizable in silhouette. Across Japan, similarly cone-shaped mountains, all much smaller, are given regional names after the true Fuji. Mount Yotei in Hokkaido is Ezo Fuji. Fukushima locals call Mount Bandai Aizu Fuji, and many more. And yet, since the last time Fuji erupted, the mountain no longer possesses its once truly conical shape. That's because the eruption was so powerful that it remade Mount Fuji's very form, leaving a deep recessed gorge some 400 meters, 1,312 feet deep, forever scarring the mountain. Surrounded by the towns and cities of Yamanashi and Shizuoka prefectures, and with Tokyo, the world's most populated urban area, only 95 kilometers or 60 miles to the southwest, Fuji's volcanic nature still presents potential danger. And yet, the last time Fuji erupted isn't a topic of frequent conversation, despite the disaster it wrought. The eruption came at a point in history that's both distant from living memory, but not so ancient as to exist in the far distant past. Fuji sits at the boundary between two major faults in one of the world's most seismically active countries. Another eruption is a question of when, not if, although that when may still be in the distant future. So let's journey to the recent samurai past to discover the last time Mount Fuji erupted, and what lessons we might take for the next time the mountain roars to life. Minasan konnichiwa, and welcome back to Unseen Japan. As always, I'm Noah Oskow, and today we're scaling the heights of Mount Fuji to discover the history of one of Japan's great disasters. So recently, while conducting our guiding for Unseen Japan tours, as geography now says, it's not selling out of its your own brand. I've had the chance to see Mount Fuji from a variety of angles, from Kamakura, Hakone, Mount Takao, Tokyo Skytree, Shizuoka, where we kind of randomly encountered the current head of the Tokugawa family. That's a story for another time. The Shinkansen, and up close and personal in the Fuji 5 Lakes area. While gazing upon Mount Fuji, our guests often ask about its history of eruptions and what danger it might pose to Tokyo. So I figured, why not dive a bit deeper into the subject with a video? And if you like this video, consider the usual liking and subscribing. Now let's dive caldera deep and learn about the last eruption of Mount Fuji. The most recent eruption of Mount Fuji was far from the only notable time the mountain blew its top, although the earliest documented case only comes in 781 AD. Long before that, prehistoric eruptions of 3 nearby volcanoes resulted in sediment buildup. This buildup eventually became the massive, conical Mount Fuji we know today. In ancient times, Fuji erupted often enough that the 8th century poetry collection, the Manyoshu, speaks of the burning fires of Fuji and calls it a god mysterious. The most notable previous eruption during the last 2,000 years came in AD 864, during the Heian era, when the emperor ruled from Kyoto and poetry and art flourished. This was the Jogan eruption, when the summit of Fuji expelled an incredible amount of fiery ash, and huge quantities of lava streamed down Fuji's west flank, pouring into the then immense Lake Senoumi. The lava flows filled in vast areas of the lake and then hardened, splitting the body of water in two. These became our modern Lake Saiko and Shojiko, 2/5 of the famed Fuji 5 Lakes. The lava field that resulted is now covered by the dense, eerily quiet treescape of Aokigahara Forest. This so-called Sea of Trees, which has a dark reputation internationally as a destination for those who wish to end their lives, was only a few centuries old when samurai armies passed it by, during the Heikei War in 1180. The Heian era was a particularly active time for Mount Fuji. 12 eruptions occurred between the years 800 and 1083. Centuries then passed with Fuji entering a state of calm, and after 400 years, Fuji produced some minor eruptions in 1511 and 1560. The danger the volcano posed could be easily forgotten, with nearly 1,000 years passing from the last massive eruption in 864 AD. Then came the winter of 1707. For generations, the fierce power of Mount Fuji would be well remembered. It began on the wintry morning of December 16th, 1707. There had been ominous signs. A month before, a massive 8.7 magnitude earthquake to the west in Wakayama shook the villages near Fuji. From then on, tremors continued around the mountain, growing in intensity, and yet the population around Mount Fuji, mostly farmers, religious mountain guides called oshi, and workers at the post towns on the road between the samurai capital of Edo and Kyoto to the far west, had little reason to worry about the mountain itself. They'd lived next to Fuji for generations, with none having seen the mountain emit even a little bit of smoke. The previous day, December 15th, brought another large quake. As the morning of the 16th dawned, a great rumbling was heard from the mountain. A local oshi recorded that people feared that Fuji was about to tear asunder. Their fears were at least partially founded. Around 10 a.m., white smoke was seen emerging from Fuji's southeast flank. The amount of smoke increased rapidly. Soon, steaming hot volcanic ejecta began to rain upon nearby villages, lighting houses on fire and burying fields. As the sky darkened, a pillar of fire appeared within the billowing smoke. Reports also speak of a volcanic thunderstorm, with lightning rippling through the ash. The eruption burst through the southeast flank of Fuji, forming 3 new vents. The area around the vents collapsed into deep craters. Volcanic material piled up on the largest crater's side, forming a new secondary peak on the mountain. These days, this peak is called Mount Hoei, and the Hoei Eruption had begun. 60 miles away, the samurai capital of Edo, which is modern Tokyo, began experiencing strange phenomena. From around 10 a.m., the shoji sliding doors of the capital started to rattle without wind or shaking ground. A monk and counselor to the shogun named Ryuko was at the castle for a ceremony as the assembled lords took note of the strange sight. He wrote of the occurrence in his diary. The denizens of Edo, many of whom noted the rattling of doors and windows, could not have known that the cause was the massive shockwave from the eruption at Mount Fuji, 100 kilometers distant. Not long after, the ground began to shake. The sky over the capital steadily darkened, as though night had fallen at midday. As scholar Bodart barely notes, by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it was raining white-hot ashes, covering the city like snow. Damage was seen as far afield as the villages located in modern-day Yokohama. There, tephra, volcanic ejecta, clogged irrigation and resulted in flooding. In Edo, people complained of respiratory problems, the result of inhalation of fine ash. Soon, exhausted messengers from Fuji appeared at the gates of Edo Castle, and the shogun's government knew a crisis was at hand. It's a quirk of historical timing that this particular disaster would occur during the reign of the 5th Tokugawa shogun, Tsunayoshi. The most controversial and denigrated of all samurai rulers in Japan, Tsunayoshi stands out for his extreme benevolence. A younger son of Tokugawa Iemitsu, the iron-fisted 3rd shogun of the dynasty, Tsunayoshi was never intended to rule. He was raised as a scholar instead of a warrior, and unexpectedly became shogun when his brother failed to sire an heir. Tsunayoshi's outlook on the role of the samurai as stewards of Japan differed greatly from that of any shogun before or after. His brother and ancestors had been warlords who believed in the right of might. Benevolence for the common folk was only so necessary as it could help avoid dangerous uprisings. But Tsunayoshi, not raised as a warrior, believed that the samurai government should protect all those over whom it ruled. He promulgated the so-called laws of compassion, shogunal edicts that protected the poor, sick, and abandoned children. Most famous, or infamous, however, were his laws outlawing animal cruelty. These began with those protecting horses, but it's the edicts criminalizing the poor treatment of dogs that earned Tsunayoshi the sobriquet he still bears today, Inu Kobo, Dog Shogun. By happenstance, the massive Hoei eruption occurred in the last years of Tsuneyoshi's reign. This still would have been an important event during any shogun's reign, but only the Dog Shogun would have paid the same attention to the suffering of those affected. The Hoei eruption of Mount Fuji occurred nearly 3 decades into Tsuneyoshi's rule. This was a unique time during the 700 years of samurai rule in Japan. It was perhaps the only time when the common people who represented the majority of the archipelago's population would feel they could truly turn to their samurai overlords for assistance. Tsuneyoshi's edicts regarding the need for benevolence were well known, so samurai lords, whether inclined towards compassion or not, knew the shogun's thoughts on such matters, and the harsh punishments he sometimes meted out to those his government accused of cruelty. The villagers in the path of Fuji's wrath had good reasons to turn to the shogunate for assistance. Entire villages had been wiped off the map, buried under meters and meters of pyroclastic missiles, or burnt to nothingness by fiery volcanic fallout. Masses of ash were building up on the flanks of Mount Fuji, and as heavy rain came in, ash mixed with waters into deadly lahars, flows of muddy water and ash that washed down into the valleys below. The lahars rushed downwards, destroying already damaged villages and damming up rivers and polluting fields. Surviving villagers, many now homeless, faced starvation as ash, mud, and smoldering rocks piled over their rice fields. With this tephra piling more than 20 feet high at the base of Mount Fuji, a mass of affected villagers from Odawara domain began making their way to the samurai capital. The villagers were enraged, having received only vague platitudes from their liege lord, Okubo Tadamasu. Approximately 60% of Odawara domain was covered in ash, yet Lord Okubo, safe in faraway Edo, was more incensed by the actions of these peasants. He suggested the ungrateful villagers be thrown in jail. That is, until he went to Edo Castle, likely to speak with the shogun. When he returned from his visit, his attitude had changed completely. Now he promised to assist the villagers in any way possible, even offering to sell his prized family sword to raise funds. Irrespective of Lord Okubo's sudden pangs of conscience, by March the shogunate had decided that the local lords of the Fuji area were not up to the task of saving the commoners. The lands were temporarily removed from control by their local lords and instead directly administered by the central government, an unprecedented move at the time. Under Magistrate Ina Tadanobu, a close advisor to the shogun, major efforts were made to clean up farmland, house commoners, and provide both financial and food relief. The damage from the eruption was so vast, however, that even the shogunate's coffers weren't deep enough for the effort. Instead, a countrywide tax was announced, with payment to be made based on the size of one's residence, in other words, based upon one's economic status. With this mostly affecting powerful samurai, a simmering anger began to develop towards the shogun amongst Japan's warrior elite. The new craters on Mount Fuji's southeast flank finally ceased erupting on January 1st, 1708. They had continued to emit smoke and projectiles for 16 days, making recovery efforts extremely difficult. As hundreds of laborers worked to clean villages, farmland, and overflowing rivers, the mountain deposited new ejecta, making their efforts feel worthless. Lahars would continue to plague the area for another century. And yet, the edicts of the central shogunate had saved countless villagers from starvation and helped position vast tracts of countryside for recovery after the disaster. No peasant riots had occurred, and samurai officials from both local domains and the shogunate worked hand in hand to restore the land. Even as new floods and other knock-on disasters occurred, progress was being made. And then, almost exactly 1 year after Mount Fuji ceased belching smoke, Shogun Tokugawa Tsuneyoshi died. He was quickly replaced by his nephew Ienobu, and before Tsuneyoshi's cremation, Ienobu insisted that various important lords bow before the shogun's body and beg his forgiveness for what they were about to do, repealing his laws of compassion. Shortly thereafter, direct shogunal assistance to the areas stricken by the Fuji disaster ceased. The era of samurai benevolence had ended. Tokugawa Tsuneyoshi's policy of benevolence during natural disasters was thrown into stark contrast by a major eruption some 80 years later. In 1783, Mount Asama, a mountain that longtime viewers here will recognize, to the northwest of modern Tokyo in Nagano Prefecture, violently erupted, killing some 1,624 people in the surrounding area. While the shogunate under Tokugawa Ieyasu did offer some assistance, it was not on the same scale as his predecessor, nor were the worries of starving peasants first on the shogun's mind. The eruption was a major contributor to the horrible Tenmei famine, one of the worst in the early modern period. Shogunate economic policies greatly exacerbated the famine. Unlike in Tsuneyoshi's time, peasant grievances were not respected, and mass riots and protests resulted. Since Mount Fuji quieted in early 1708, the mountain has never again awoken. Memories of the destruction and of ashy snows in Old Edo have long since been forgotten. The event is essentially absent from Japanese textbooks. For over 300 years, Fuji has slumbered, and yet the idea of Mount Fuji roaring back to life is not an infrequent subject of conversation, speculation, and governmental preparation. Fuji is technically dormant, but as Japanese researchers have stated, the volcano is only superficially inactive.
富士山はまだ若々しい活火山ですから、必ず噴火をすると思います。
The 2011 Great East Japan earthquake directly focused public attention on Fuji's volcanism. That devastating magnitude 9.0 megaquake triggered a 5.9 magnitude quake beneath Fuji's southern flank, directly above the volcano's magma system. This led to the Japanese government proclaiming the proposal for large-scale volcano disaster countermeasures. What exactly would a modern Mount Fuji eruption look like? Well, the Hoei Eruption of 1707 gives us a window into the possibilities, and yet it's not a perfect guideline since Fuji has numerous types of eruptions in its long history. At times, eruptions exploded outwards from Fuji's summit in a Plinian eruption. Other times, Fuji belched streams of lava, and in 1707, it experienced a flank eruption. Exactly which region around Fuji could next be in danger is hard to say. Two main crises could be caused by Fuji again erupting: a major sector collapse and the blanketing of Tokyo in volcanic ash. The former would mean an entire section of Mount Fuji being shaken loose by an earthquake or eruption, resulting in a devastating landslide that could spread out for miles. This would be similar to the 1888 explosion of Fukushima's Mount Bandai, the worst volcanic disaster in modern Japanese history. Fuji's western slope is gravitationally unstable. In other words, it slopes at a 34-degree angle, steeper than most pyroclastically formed mountains. A major eruption could shake part of the slope loose, sending it tumbling towards the closest communities, which lie 12 kilometers from the summit, within potential striking range. For the great population centers inside of the mountain, however, it's ashfall that would pose the most likely danger. Ash blanketed the streets of Edo during the Hoei Eruption. In the modern era, ashfall has additional ramifications that weren't present in the samurai era. In terms of physical danger, the Tokyo government worries that ash buildup, combined with rain, could create burdens on wooden buildings in Tokyo heavy enough to cause collapse. The Tokyo government has a 4-stage ashfall response plan ready for such an event. If more than 30 centimeters or 1 foot of ash falls on Tokyo, the prefecture is prepared to begin evacuations of its many millions of residents. Notably, the Hoei eruption only dusted Old Edo with around 4 centimeters of ash. 30 centimeters would mean this was a far greater eruption than that of 1707. But even smaller amounts of ashfall can still result in railway and plane stoppage, and worse could damage Tokyo's vast electrical grid. TEPCO is the company that supplies Tokyo with the 50 gigawatts of energy it needs every day. Much of Tokyo's electricity comes from thermal generators located near Tokyo Bay. These are within the range of the ashfall from Fuji's last eruption, and could easily be disrupted by ash clogging gas turbines. Massive power outages could result, disrupting life here in the Japanese capital and beyond, and backup electricity from Western Japanese power plants traverse lines near Mount Fuji. In other words, locations that could be destroyed by volcanic missiles. All in all, experts expect that the next eruption of Mount Fuji could disrupt Japan to the tune of around $16 billion. The potential impact on those living near Mount Fuji or climbing the mountain at the moment of its explosion would be deadly indeed. Mass power outages for the 37 million people who live in the Tokyo metro area could also create life-threatening issues. Supply chains could well collapse. Still, there's little reason to fret or avoid the Fuji region for fear of cataclysm. Mount Fuji has been dormant for centuries, and our understanding of seismic and volcanic activity is improving all the time. There would likely be signs before an eruption, and even if Mount Fuji were to erupt again, it may still be centuries in our future. Perhaps most heartening is the lesson of Shogun Tokugawa Tsunayoshi. In his time, his compassion was the true exception to 700 years of military rule. His government helped victims of the Hoei disaster in a way that was then unprecedented. In our modern culture, government and civilian aid are the rule rather than the exception. Bureaucratic bumbling notwithstanding, we no longer have to rely on a single benevolent ruler chancing to inherit the throne. When the next Mount Fuji eruption comes, with the power of modern society behind us, we can hope to be a little more ready. Hey there Mina, thanks for watching this one. Like I said, this is a topic I'm often asked about on tours, and one I enjoy learning all the more about via the attendant research. As a longtime Tokyoite at this point, it's also really something worth knowing about, even if I'm not particularly worried about Fuji exploding anytime soon. As usual, I have more videos coming down the pipeline, so hope to see you again here soon. As always, if you really like what I'm up to at this channel, consider supporting us over on Patreon, or maybe even booking a tour with us if you get to Japan. Well, until then, mata ne. And what lessons we went and well.
Tea time!